Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 786, and today is April 17th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show, and apologies for not having the show out yesterday as scheduled. Tuesday night here in the U.S. was Tats Day, and we were just up very late. Kind of extra paranoid trying to get the Tatses exactly right this year. So a day late, but we got the show and a lot of news to cover, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to share the show. It's hosted over at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show, and it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. Let's get into the news today. All right, so first up here on today's show, we have this article from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. U.S. had no evidence linking detained Tufts students to anti-Semitism or terrorism. The U.S. government has no evidence that Tufts student Razuma Yazturk has engaged in anti-Semitic activities or made public comments in support of U.S. designated terrorist organizations before she was detained by ICE, the Washington Post reported on Sunday. The report said Yazturk's arrest, the State Department determined that Secretary of State Marco Rubio didn't have the authority to revoke her student visa under an authority the administration is attempting to use to deport critics of Israel. Yazturk, a PhD student who was targeted for co-authoring an op-ed last year, called for Tufts University to divest from Israel and acknowledge the Palestinian genocide. And so this story is one of the most disturbing of everybody who's been deported. And there's been a lot of disturbing stories of people being deported, including some who it's not exactly the content of their speech, it's just their immigration status. And they're, these are the people being sent to El Salvador. But particularly in the category of those, I think it's about a half dozen now, who have been arrested are in the works of being deported over their pro-Palestinian solidarity. Yazturk's story is maybe the most upsetting and maybe the most troublesome of them. Now, that's not to diminish anybody else's claims that, they have First Amendment rights or anything like that, but Yazturk, she wasn't involved in any of the protest or anything like that. She just co-authored an op-ed. She wrote an article on her perspective that she co-authored, right, at her student newspaper, making an argument for her university to divest from the state of Israel. This is common free speech. This is appropriate speech. This is, even Marco Rubio says, oh, we wouldn't have given you a student visa if you were saying you would come here and protest and riot and destroy universities. That's not what she was doing. She was engaging in debate and intellectual thought, something that's clearly lacking in the White House, but that doesn't get rid of the First Amendment. And so this is obviously just flat out wrong. The Post said the Post report said that the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security had recommended to the State Department that Yazturk's visa be revoked under an obscure provision of the Immigrant and Nationality Act of 1952 that allows the deportation of someone the Secretary of State has reasonable grounds to believe their presence would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. Now, again, writing an op-ed in a student newspaper isn't even something that gets read by the vast majority of the American public, and probably not even the vast majority of the Tufts University community even looked at this article. So this idea that this is going to have a major, potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequence for the United States makes no sense whatsoever. And even if it did, again, the First Amendment should supersede. So the Department of Homeland Security said Yazturk had engaged in anti-Israeli activism and referred to the op-ed she co-authored. Yazturk was first targeted by pro-Israeli groups, including the Canary Mission, which doxes students and professors critical of Israel. The Canary Mission's page on Yazturk lists only the op-ed as the example of her anti-Israeli activism. The State Department found that there was not sufficient evidence to deport Ozturk under the provision DHS recommended. Instead, the State Department said she could be deported using another authority under the Immigration and Nationality Act that allows for the revocation of a visa at the Secretary of State's discretion, according to the Post. Ozturk was detained in Massachusetts, not too far where I used to live, by the way. I used to walk down the street that she was actually arrested on. So they arrested her on March 25th, and she is now being held in an ICE facility in Louisiana. In a declaration obtained by NBC News on Sunday, Ozturk says she was being held in inhumane and unsafe conditions and that her asthma was not being properly treated. Footage of Ozturk being arrested by masked federal agents provoked widespread condemnation of the Trump administration's crackdown on speech critical of Israel. Ozturk said the declaration that she was terrified during her arrest and she thought the agents were private individuals who might try to kill her. And if you watch the video, you would absolutely understand why she thought that. And you wouldn't even recognize this as an arrest that's happening in the United States. You would assume it would have happened in a communist country like the USSR or something like that. The arrest was just absolutely disturbing and disgusting. All right, next up, more news on Israel here. Israel to receive major new weapons shipment from the U.S. So the Israeli military is set to receive a major new weapons shipment from the U.S. in the coming weeks to help it prepare for a continued operation in Gaza and a potential Israeli attack on Iran. The Israeli news site Ynet reported on Monday. The details of the arms shipment are unclear, but Ynet said it would include 3,000 munitions for the Israeli Air Force. The report said the bomb shipment was recently approved by the Trump administration. The Pentagon's Defense Cooperation Agency said on Monday that the State Department approved a $180 million deal for Ethon power pack engines that will go to Israel, but did not announce any new bomb shipments. The Ynet report said the new weapons shipment will help prepare Israel for a new large-scale campaign in Gaza, and that it comes in addition to over 10,000 munitions that are expected to replenish the Israeli stockpiles soon. The Trump administration approved a series of arms deals and weapons shipments for Israel, totaling more than $12 billion, including tens of thousands of 2,000-pound bombs, which Israel has dropped on densely populated civilian areas of Gaza. The Trump officials have claimed that the Biden administration placed a potential arms embargo on Israel, but President Biden provided more military aid to Israel in a single year than any other president in U.S. history. I'm guessing Trump will break that record in 2025, but for the record as it stands now, it is Biden's in 2024. So the idea that there was an embargo or that weapons were being withheld from Israel is simply absurd. So next up here on the fighting inside of Gaza, Hamas said it lost contact with guards of U.S. Israeli captive after an Israeli strike. So Hamas's military wing, that's the Al-Qassam's brigade, said Tuesday that following a strike an Israeli strike, it lost contact with the group guarding Idan Alexander, a 21-year-old Israeli soldier with American citizenship who was captured during his Hamas October 7th attack on southern Israel. And he was, an active duty soldier at the time. I think he was in a tank or patrolling the Gaza border. So the group's spokesman said, "We announced we have lost contact with the team guarding soldier Idan Alexander following his direct Israeli bombardment targeting their location. We are still trying to reach them. It seems the occupation army is deliberately trying to kill him and hence relieve themselves of the pressure caused by the dual citizen prisoner in order to continue the genocidal war against our people." And so what Hamas is talking about there's previously deals on the table, and the White House was working to get Idan Alexander released in exchange for Hamas and Israel agreeing to a couple weeks of additional ceasefire. Now, the Israelis seem to have come in and made sure that deal didn't happen. In fact, the Israeli advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Ron Dermer, called the U.S. Hostage negotiator ambassador, that was Adam Boehler, and read him the riot act. The Israeli official, Tel Aviv, who has received over $20 billion in U.S. support over the past 18 months, an Israeli official called an American official and read the American official the riot act because the American official was negotiating with Hamas on getting an American soldier, Idan Alexander, released. And so the idea that the Israelis have the hubris to be upset at the Americans for anything right now is simply unbelievably stupid, right? And this should have resulted in the Trump administration calling Netanyahu and saying that not only is Adam Boehler not going to be fired, he is going to head all of our negotiations with Hamas from going on now. And if Israel wants to receive another penny in U.S. aid, a single bomb, a single bullet from the United States of America, Ron Dermer will be fired. Right? That an Israeli official does not get to call an American official and yell at them. That doesn't get to happen, right? When you are giving that country tens of billions of dollars a year and helping them commit a genocide. But that's what's going on here. It's absolutely insane. And so that's what Hamas is talking about here, that Israel wanted to kill Idan Alexander because the Americans were interested in negotiating his release. And again, absolutely baffling. As the Times of Israel explained, the Israelis didn't want Idan Alexander released because, again, this is from the Times of Israel, Israeli media, because they were concerned if the last dual American citizen was released as a Gaza captive, then the Trump administration might not be as concerned with giving Israel military support. And so they kept him there, and now they're killing him because they want this to continue. They don't want him released because they think this will take away Trump's motivation to wage the war. My guess is that after the killing of the 12 Palestinian medics in Rafah a couple weeks ago, and the U.S. blaming that on Hamas, even though the Israeli military just opened up fire and executed 15 Palestinian medics, right? That happened. No Hamas in the area. Hamas was still blamed. So I'm sure Israel feels that at this point, if they kill Idan Alexander, then the U.S. is going to blame Hamas and just send Israel more weapons because Hamas killed an American. So Alexander grew up in New Jersey and moved to Israel to join the IDF after high school. He is believed to be the only surviving Israeli hostage in Gaza with American citizenship. Hamas also has the bodies of 4 dual U.S. Israeli citizens. The Trump administration was briefly engaged in direct negotiations with Hamas to reach a deal that would free Alexander. The effort was opposed by Israel, and U.S. officials believe that Israeli officials leaked information about the negotiations to the media to derail them. So, family members of Israeli hostages held in Gaza are strongly opposed to Israel resuming its massive bombing campaign in Gaza because it puts the captives in danger. Israeli strikes have presumably killed Israeli hostages, and reporting from 972 magazine recently revealed that the IDF dropped massive 2,000-pound bombs on area where intelligence suggested the Israeli captives could have been. But even worse, they dropped multiple 2,000-pound bombs on this location. And the Israelis understood that this essentially creates a chemical weapon that sucks all the oxygen out of underground facilities. And so they knew they were essentially gassing their own captives in order not to have them, because the captives give Hamas leverage. And when Hamas has leverage, they try to use it to get Palestinians freed from Israeli detention. They try to get more rights, more ability to have more access in and out of Gaza, more fishing rights off the coast of Gaza. And so Israel would rather these captives be dead than to be in the hands of Hamas at this point. All right, so the Israeli defense minister says no humanitarian aid will enter Gaza and vows an indefinite occupation. So on Wednesday, the Israeli defense minister, that's Israel Katz, said no humanitarian aid will enter Gaza and vowed the IDF will occupy the territory it has captured in Gaza indefinitely. Since March 2nd, Israel has imposed a total blockade on all aid entering Gaza and all other commercial goods too, which constitutes collective punishment for the entire civilian population. Katz said the blockade was one of Israel's main pressure tools against Hamas. Katz, in his post on X, explained, Israel's policy is clear. No humanitarian aid will be allowed into Gaza, and preventing humanitarian aid to Gaza is one of the central pressure tools to stop Hamas from using these means against the population. No one, under the current reality, is going to allow any humanitarian aid into Gaza, and no preparations are being made to allow any kind of aid. So Katz's comments were made to clarify an earlier statement where he suggested that Israel could allow the distribution of aid through civilian companies. In his statement, he also said IDF's troops would not leave the territory they have captured since Israel restarted its genocidal war on March 18th. So he explained, the IDF will remain in the security zones as a buffer between the enemy and the communities in any temporary or permanent reality in Gaza, similar to Lebanon and Syria. To date, hundreds of thousands of residents have been evacuated and dozens of percent of the territory have been incorporated into these security zones. And don't forget, I wrote this article a couple months ago, not months ago, probably a month ago now, maybe even the beginning of this month, that Katz did say that Israel was going to start annexing the Gaza Strip. And so that seems to be what he's saying here. So he added that in parallel to the Israeli occupation of territory in Gaza, the plan for voluntary relocation of Gaza residents is being advanced. The Israeli military now controls more than 50% of Gaza's territory and is working to turn the entire southern city of Rafah into a buffer zone free of Palestinians. The Associated Press noted that comments will likely further compliance negotiations with Hamas, further complicate negotiations with Hamas, since the Palestinian group is insisting that will only free the remaining Israeli hostages in exchange for a permanent ceasefire and an Israeli withdrawal, terms Israel has refused. Katz said that if Hamas continues to refuse to release hostages under Israelis' terms, which now include the demand for the group to disarm, the Israeli military operations in Gaza will expand and move to the next stage. Katz's comments come as aid groups are warning about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza due to the Israeli blockade and the daily slaughter of Palestinians. Doctors Without Borders said Wednesday that Gaza is turning into a massive grave for Palestinians. And so this is what one of the Doctors Without Borders emergency coordinators in Gaza wrote. Gaza has turned into a mass grave of Palestinians and those coming to their assistance. We are witnessing in real time the destruction and forced displacement of an entire population. Nowhere safe for Palestinians or those trying to help them, the humanitarian response is severely struggling under the weight of the insecurity and critical supply shortages, leaving people with few, if any, options for assessing care. And as we have said on this show time and time again, but I think it's so important to restate, that this is the crime of the century. This is one of the worst things that will happen in our entire lifetimes. For all the natural disasters and horrific events that I have lived through in my life, this will be one of the absolute worst things to have happened. And it makes me utterly sick every single day that the U.S. is allowing it to happen, that without the U.S. support, it wouldn't happen. Sure, the Israelis are ultimately at fault here, right? Benjamin Netanyahu is an evil, a dirty, a disgusting man that we should all hate and we should all boo and jeer, and who belongs in prison. Absolutely. Absolutely. But as an American, we have to condemn our own government that's allowing Netanyahu to do what he wants to do. All right. Next up here, moving around to some other areas in the Middle East, starting off with Iran. Iran warns against U.S. moving goalposts after Witkoff's statement on enrichment. And so Iran on Wednesday warned the U.S. against moving the goalposts after U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff suggested the Trump administration was seeking a deal to eliminate Tehran's nuclear program. This is their civilian energy program, by the way. So Witkoff said in a statement on Tuesday that any deal must eliminate, Iran must eliminate its nuclear enrichment program. And so the statement came after he suggested that the U.S. would be happy with a deal that eliminated Iran's nuclear enrichment to 3.67%. Now, let's get in and kind of break down why all this is important. And there's a lot of prongs here. This is something I actually talked about in quite a bit of detail on the Kyle Anzalone show yesterday. So if you want some more information on go check out the Kyle Anzalone show. It's the first link in the show notes. So very easy to find. Subscribe to the channel. That really helps me out, by the way. So what is happening here is that under the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which Trump, of course, left in 2018, Iran had agreed to limit its nuclear enrichment abilities to 3.67%. This is an enrichment level needed for nuclear fuel. So this allows them to power their nuclear energy program. Now, part of the reason that Iran, I believe, wants a nuclear enrichment program is it does give them a latent nuclear deterrent, which means that if they ever decided to build a nuclear weapon, they have the enrichment capabilities. Not that they have the enrichment capabilities needed to enrich uranium to a level to build a nuclear weapon with. And so what the US and Israel want to do, I think here, is to basically put a deal forward on the table that they know Iran will not accept. And so then they could point and say, see, it's those damn Iranians. You just can't negotiate with them. They just love their nukes. They're building a nuclear weapon, and we have to do something about it. And so that's the poison pill here, where Iran doesn't want to build a nuclear weapon. They want a latent nuclear deterrent. So if they're ever attacked by Israel or the US, they could go ahead and build a bomb because both Israel and the US have nuclear weapons. So that's the Iranian feeling here. They're willing to go back to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, even after Trump vacated it in 2018. But they're saying that, Witkoff's statement is going beyond that and actually killing talks. Now, the reason I think that this is so important and so critical is right now there's been a lot of reports about this in the White House. There's a debate going on. And on one side, you have J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, and Steve Witkoff. And they're saying that, Mr. President, we shouldn't go to war with Iran. We could make a deal with the Iranians. And sure, if we can't make a deal with the Iranians, then we could talk about going to war. But right now, we don't need to talk about going to war with the Iranians. And then there's another group, and it's led by Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz. It has allies on the outside, but in Congress, like Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham. And then in the think tank realm, like the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, right? These are all people who support the plan that say, don't even bother talking with the Iranians. The Iranians are weak. We don't have to negotiate with them. Right now, we could destroy their nuclear program. We could overthrow the Ayatollah. We could create a whole new Iran, a whole new Middle East, they say, right? That's what they're trying to sell to Trump. Now, the problem is that if team negotiation has Steve Witkoff on it, and Steve Witkoff's negotiations and demands of Iran include something that Iran will not accept, will flat out not accept, not having an enrichment program, then he's almost ensuring that Team B, that Team War, ends up winning the debate because he's killing his own negotiations with this poison pill. And so I am very worried here that we're setting up this situation in the United States where, okay, there are some people who are saying let's engage in talks. And Trump says, you know what, that's JD, that sounds pretty reasonable. We can engage in negotiations with Iran. And so he sends Steve Witkoff over there to negotiate with the Iranians. And Witkoff says to the Iranians, well, you had to completely get rid of your nuclear program. You can have no nuclear enrichment whatsoever. The Iranians will say, we can't accept that deal. So Witkoff goes back to Donald Trump and says, the Iranians say we can't accept the deal that I proposed to them. Well, then, now all that's left standing, the people who are right, are the people in the war camp. This is going to be the perspective of Donald Trump. Now, I think maybe our one interesting component to all this is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who I really hope understands the situation that attacking Iran's nuclear program could lead to Iran to make nuclear weapons and likely will not eliminate Iran's nuclear program. And so by striking Iran's nuclear program, you're declaring war on the Islamic Republic and pushing the Islamic Republic to go ahead and make a nuclear weapon, which will make them a serious geostrategic threat in the Middle East. It will make them them a serious power that must be negotiated with, which must be reasoned with. You can't solve this problem with war if Tehran could drop a nuclear weapon on Tel Aviv. And so I really hope that Netanyahu understands that going to war with Iran at this point, when the Ayatollah is an old man, when Hezbollah and Assad have been beaten back, Assad's gone, he's in Russia now, Hezbollah beaten back, all these things that they said the Iranians would never allow, the Iranians allowed to happen. It's very clear that the Ayatollah, I think, is concerned about Iran's economy and the livelihood of the Iranian people. And a war with Israel and the U.S. doesn't help the Iranian people. And even if that's a war over, the existence of a Palestinian state, going to war to prevent the ethnic cleansing of Iranians, the Ayatollah is made it clear that he's not going to do that. So Netanyahu could have everything he wants: annexation of the West Bank and Gaza, annexation of southern Israel and Lebanon, no Hezbollah, no Assad. The Shia militias in Iraq and Syria are bombed by the U.S. The Houthis in Yemen are bombed by the U.S. And so Netanyahu is already getting everything he wants. So why back a strike? Now, Netanyahu is opposed to talks, and this isn't unexpected because Netanyahu was opposed to the initial Iran nuclear deal. And I think, again, the reason there is he wants the Iran bogeyman to be in place because that is what a lot of the Israeli propaganda is based in. Why Israel needs so much support from the United States is often cloaked and explained in, this Iran nuclear threat is building and coming, and they're 2 weeks away from the bomb. My entire life, Iran has been 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. I'm 35 years old. Absolutely absurd. So, that's the propaganda that they don't want to give up. I really hope Tel Aviv doesn't actually want to go to war. And if Tel Aviv doesn't want to go to war, then maybe one won't happen. Now, in Lebanon, Israeli ground troops are pushing deeper into southern Lebanon and continuing attacks. This one from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Through the November 26th ceasefire that was meant to end the Israeli invasion and occupation of Lebanese territory, Israeli troops had never completely left, and on Monday they expanded the occupation once again, pushing deeper into Lebanon. Israeli troops and civilian administrators advanced along the river near the village of Wazani. They reportedly advanced further west and opened fire on people on the outskirts of another village and conducted search operations in the area. Details are still emerging on what they are doing and why, but the most significant part of this further invasion of Lebanese territory is that Israel has not publicly commented on the matter at all, not even offering the sorts of flimsy pretexts they generally give for violations of the ceasefire. And my guess is they know that they don't have to, because the U.S. bats whatever Israel wants in Lebanon at this point, even if it means taking more territory. Now, interesting here, report U.S. tells Israel it will begin drawdown from Syria in 2 months. This one from Dave DeCamp, April 15th at antiwar.com. Pentagon officials have told their Israeli counterparts that the U.S. will begin a phased withdrawal of troops from Syria within 2 months. A senior Israeli official said that the U.S. withdrawal could be partial, meaning only some of the estimated 2,000 troops in eastern Syria could leave. Remember, during the last Trump administration, there was only about 900 U.S. troops, so we could have a drawdown back to the previous U.S. levels. It'll be interesting to see where these troops are actually drawing down from, where, and why that's happening. A lot of details here are yet to be discovered, but definitely something to keep our eye on. Next up, U.S. considers backing a ground offensive against the Houthis in Yemen. So the U.S. is considering backing a ground offensive against the Houthis in Yemen, the Wall Street Journal reported on Monday. That report said that the plans to back anti-Houthi militias on the ground have been brought to the U.S. by the UAE, and that the U.S. is open to the idea but hasn't made any final decision yet. So I think this is important, and let's get into it a little bit. So after the Houthis took control of Sana'a in 2014 and then early 2015, when the Saudis declared war on Ansar Allah, wanting to put Mansour Hadi back into power in Sana'a, in the capital city of Yemen, The Saudis did try to use some of their own special forces to go into Sadah and take out the Houthi leadership, and this was ultimately unsuccessful, and the Saudis apparently lost quite a few soldiers in that operation. And so since, the Saudis have mainly backed a different variety of militias on the ground in Yemen, as well as, and the UAE has done so as well. I think the main person the Saudis were backing was Tariq. Tariq. He was the son of the previous leader of Yemen, Salah. So Tariq Salah is who they were backing, and then there's also this other force, the Giants Brigade, and this is made up of veterans of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and the Islamic State in Yemen, and that is the group that's been backed by the UAE. And so if this is who the US is talking about backing, we are talking about fighting a war. Just like in Syria, we are talking about fighting another war to put Al-Qaeda, jihadists, head-chopping lunatics in charge of another Middle Eastern country. This is just baffling insane. So as, U.S.-backed jihadists are making advances, in other places, jihadists opposed to the U.S. are also making advances. So Al-Shabaab has captured a town in central Somalia that the U.S.-backed federal government has used as a staging ground for battles in the area. The town of Adan Yabal is about 130 miles north of Mogadishu, where the federal government is based. Somali soldiers and residents from the village told Reuters that Al-Shabaab captured the town after hours of heavy fighting. Al-Shabaab has been making gains in its offensive and recently captured villages only 30 miles away from Mogadishu. So, although they later retreated from those villages, the offensive has enough momentum that the U.S., which spats the government with airstrikes against Al-Shabaab, has been discussing the possibility of shuttering its embassy in Mogadishu because they're worried that Al-Shabaab is going to take over and overrun the town. There's a fantastic article, by the way, at the American Conservative by my friend Brad Pierce that recently got into how well Al-Shabaab is doing in Somalia, and how even with millions and millions of dollars of U.S. aid, it hasn't made a difference in that country. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning into the show so much today. We will be back with another episode tomorrow.